Imagine you were traded across a fence line without leaving the county, parceled like seed and tallied in a book. On the moonless night when a tobacco barn sucked wind through its slats and dogs slept under the porch, the paper that bound her life finally met flame. She found the courthouse copy first, then the church minutes, and then the private ledger with its grease ring thumbprints, and she made each record contradict the next. She set a straw fire where no one would look for weather, and she walked a road no one watched after communion. She did burn a ledger, but when escape began, the church bell answered from the next ridge, and the dogs went to ground sooner than planned. Which paper would outlive the others, and who would believe ink over smoke? On October 3, 2019, in a reading room at the Library of Virginia, a grad student from Charlottesville opened a flat archival box labeled Augusta County Deeds, 1853 to 1856. The charged image came first. A ledger leaf with a grease ring where a thumb had rested, a faint scent of smoke caught in the paper, impossible after so many years unless something else in the box had burned and shared its memory. The deed of trust lay beneath it, neat and ordinary, until the eye caught the line where a daughter's name sat between 2 barrels of salt and 1 bay mare, as if flesh could be stacked like goods. Cross-referenced church minutes from the old church on Mossy Run named a household assurance and a private inquiry into improprieties of stewardship, a phrase drawn tight as a noose and just as revealing. A second folder held a ferry chit from the North River stamped 2 days after a Sunday admonition. What looks like gossip becomes geometry, inked lines between sites, bell times, and footsteps. The student took a photograph, hands, paper, a soft cube of afternoon light on the table, and emailed a local historian the way thunder warns a valley. An academic paper would follow 6 months later, but the first truth belonged to the image. Someone had made the records contradict each other on purpose, and someone else had tried to erase the contradiction with fire. By 1854, Hartwell Place is a mid-sized operation with tobacco rows cut along a south slope and a yard beaten to hardpan between the main house and the storehouse. The quarters stand beyond a locust cluster, just far enough to be seen and not heard, and the kennel leans into the shade where the lane dips. A tobacco barn breathes through its vertical boards like a living thing. The day is measured by tasks that pretend to be natural law, churn at first light, weed through noon, tally at dusk. The ledger is the house's second heart. Eliza's wound is not a single blow, but a cursor that never lifts. When her father deeded her as collateral to Nathan Wren, the figures slid over her like a lid. The church minutes called it temporary guardianship, but every word pushed air out of her lungs the same way. She learned to read as a child using the household ledger, tracing numbers with a forefinger while her mother priced wool and sugar. Now the same hand adds her name to household assurances in Wren's copybook. Every Sunday, the old church bell rings, and a neat line notes who sat where. After worship, Reverend Pike meets with Absalom Hartwell and Nathan Wren in the vestry, and the minutes grow thicker, kinder on their surface, more lethal in their accumulation. Eliza knots her ribbon every dusk. 1 knot marks 1 day under assurance. After 5 knots, she reties the end to keep the ribbon from fraying. After 10 knots, she kisses the sampler frame and makes no sign at all. She inventories habits the way she inventories pantry staples. Silas Mott walks the fence line at blue hour, twice after bell ring. The dogs feed on kitchen scraps, then curl under the porch. Nathan Wren weighs salt barrels on Fridays, and the same chalk makes marks on his ledger and on his belt. Her competence, numbers as weather, teaches her where a storm might come from if she could learn to call the wind. Absalom Hartwell smooths paper more than he touches people. He keeps his ledger in the office cabinet with a latch that sticks unless you lift it slightly before pushing. He believes in witnesses of the right kind, men in coats, not servants, not women. At sunrise, he stands in the yard and counts rows, not faces. His weakness is not seeing anything he did not plan to touch. Nathan Wren smells of salt and cured meat. His storehouse keeps the valley fed and indebted. His keys hang from a ring that should be simpler than it is. He hides 1 spare key in a stanchion crack at the storehouse stall. By evening, the ring weighs heavier, and the notch on his belt sits 1 hole lower from a midday dinner that never fails. He writes a steady hand that sometimes slurs at dusk. Silas Mott's rope knows more stories than his mouth. He checks the rusted lock on the storehouse door at the same time every night, then pours a tin cup from a jug he hides behind a broken plow, then dozes in a chair by the kennel while the dogs twitch at the smell of fox. On Sundays, he wears boots that drag. On weekdays, his boots bite. Reverend Ephraim Pike keeps a clean pen and a cleaner lapel. He believes a tidy minute can cool any heat. He sits in the vestry with his back to the little window and writes names, then crosses out the troublesome ones until the line of ink sits quiet. He does not worry about keys because his power is the bell rope and the quorum it summons. The decoy key ring begins life as a waste of time. Eliza learns the weight of Wren's keys by memory. She copies the ring and kitchen iron, shaving one bit with a file until the shape feels familiar in her palm. The rusted lock on the Hartwell office cabinet sticks. A lifted latch frees it. The salt barrel in Wren's storehouse bears a chalk X when underweight. The barrel's ring is splintered at one point where a nail bent wrong. The tobacco barn drafts along its north wall. Smoke drawn there leaves ash patterns like script when wind shifts. A fairy chit stamped in Staunton allows toll-free passage for church matters on certain days. Reverend Pike's signature appears on the back of such chits when he vouches for a messenger. Eliza observes each item and writes nothing, because her memory of numbers is sharper than ink. An unexpected witness appears in red, a neighbor child from the Wren place, shawl bright against dull pasture, who taps a fence rail to count wagons headed to the courthouse road. Eliza files the rhythm away. Wagons make time as well as distance. The deed of trust is read in the vestry after communion. The minutes will later record that questions of household assurance were settled in Christian charity. What it settles is Eliza's person as an entry line below salt and above a mare. Wren's wife takes a ribbon and measures Eliza's waist as if for a dress. The measurement later appears as fitness in a private note, cramped between flour weights. The ledger learns more of her body than any mirror. In this world, a girl can be collateral and respectable at once, and the bell will not ring differently. Eliza's revenge is not heat, but calibration. She does not imagine knives. She imagines contradictions between books, the courthouse copy, the Wren ledger, the church minutes, the Hartwell household account, until a sheriff cannot tell which witness to trust. She imagines a burn that looks like weather, a door that opens with a key that almost fits, a dog that chases a bell rope rather than a girl. She imagines being gone before anyone decides which paper speaks loudest. Days fall into their grooves. Pre-dawn, smoke lifts from the kitchen chimney. The pre-dawn bell at the old church tolls a single slow note for matins. At noon, glare flattens the yard and sends Silas to his jug. In the blue hour, dogs curl and breathe in sync with the kitchen hearth. On Fridays, Nathan Wren's wagon creaks onto Hartwell Place with salt and small goods, and his ledger opens with a friendly sigh. On Sundays, the old church bell calls bodies to benches and figures to margins. Eliza's ribbon ticks, one knot, then another, then a tightness that means a week has been swallowed. From the quarters come the soft economies of resistance that never claim their names, a lost nail here, a hinge that learns to groan, a rope that refuses to snug at first pull. Eliza does not instruct. She listens and borrows. She borrows the hinge's lesson and the rope's obstinacy. She tests the decoy keyring against the pantry chest when the house sleeps, feeling for the metallic catch that betrays a near fit. She learns that near is sometimes enough if no one is looking at your hands. She counts dogs. There are 4 in the kennel, 1 old hound who sleeps through thunder, 2 rangy hunters who wake at a fly's footstep, and 1 young bitch who hates the bell. The young one barks at the first peal, then runs the fence line in a panic, dragging the others into confusion. Silas curses the bell most on Sundays and feeds them extra scraps to keep them quiet. Eliza files this too, like a figure in a margin. By late autumn, sleet spits at the barn siding, and tobacco hangs like dark laundry, smelling of green and smoke. The kitchen keeps a second fire for drying stockings. Nathan Wren presses Absalom Hartwell for settlement and mentions household assurances with a neutral jaw. The church minutes record a private admonition that says nothing and everything. Reverend Pike drafts a letter to facilitate church matters across the river. A blank fairy chit waits for a name. Eliza squares the distance between the storehouse, the tobacco barn, the yard, the quarters, and the bend where the warm spring road meets the lane. She thinks in lengths of breath and sound, how far a bell travels on moist air, how long a dog needs to nose a false trail of meat scraps tossed near the bell rope, how quickly smoke hugs the barn's north wall when wind comes off the Blue Ridge like a hand. She places the decoy keyring under a loose kitchen stone and tests the rusted lock on the office cabinet again. She extracts one sheet from the household ledger, a month's tally of salt and soap and ribbon, and replaces it later with a near match in a hand she has practiced by lamplight. The forgery is not perfect. It does not have to be. It only has to disagree. The neighbor child in the red shawl appears on the fence again, tapping as wagons pass toward Staunton. Eliza watches from the herb patch and calibrates the intervals. A wagon to the courthouse means clerk, copy, stamp, witnesses. It also means the old church will ring twice for an afternoon catechism and draw Silas to the gallery with his boots dragging. Dogs will shift in their sleep. She ties a fresh knot in her ribbon and feels the sampler frame bite her finger. The weather promises wind shear, the kind that lifts smoke then throws it down. The barn's north wall will write its own ash patterns if asked. The salt barrel in Wren's storehouse sits lighter than it should. Its chalk X is an invitation. There is no heroism here, only timing. Only a girl who can make paper, speak against paper, long enough to walk out from between them. Blue hour slides over Hartwell Place. From Mossy Run, the old church bell rope lifts in Reverend Pike's careful hand and drops once, then again, the sound rolling across the fields like an order. Dogs raise their muzzles, confused, then surge to the fence as the young bitch breaks into frantic circles. The bell tolls a third time. Blue hour thins into night, the kind that steals edges from fences and turns the lane into a darker stripe. Wind drags down from the Blue Ridge with the promised shear, shouldering smoke flat when it finds it. Eliza waits for the second bell from the old church, the one that draws Silas Mott to the gallery for catechism talk and leaves the kennel to its own doubts. She has counted this rhythm for weeks, counted it with ribbon knots, with chalk smears she never made, and with distances paced by breath. The house breathes through its joints after supper, floorboards ticking as heat leaves them. In the office, the cabinet latch still needs a lifted nudge before it will give, a small flaw learned by fingertip more than eye. Eliza's hands have cooked and washed for years. Tonight they handle paper. The rusted lock complains in the keyhole as expected. She does not turn it. She lifts. The latch frees. Inside, the household ledger lies where Absalom Hartwell left it, ribbon marker trapped between pages for October provisions. She slides out the month's leaf she tested earlier, the one she can replace without leaving a torn tongue of paper behind. In its place, she sets her practiced sheet, soap, salt, ribbon, and one line for church messenger's toll that seems innocuous. The hand is near enough at a glance. It will not bear a courtroom. It does not need to. The point is contradiction. The Hartwell book will soon speak of a toll the Wren copy does not show, and the fairy chit will insist on a day the church minutes claim for something else. She closes the ledger, lowers the latch, and leaves one fingerprint where she knows Absalom's thumbprint already lives. Grease ring kisses, grease ring, the way old ink remembers. On her way out, she tips the office tinderbox, scattering 2 splinters on the rug. Not for burning here, only for question later, a breadcrumb with no heat. The yard lies in hardpan silence, save the kennel's slow rasp. 4 dogs, as always. The old sleeper, the 2 watchers, and the young bitch who hates the bell. She tucks meat scraps along the fence by the lane, then one more damp bit looped to the bell rope at the little yard post where a hand tug can call a farmhand from the quarters. She is not ringing it. She is moving scent. When wind lifts, the rope will thrum and the scrap will smear odor along the post, a narrow false trail for muzzles trained to read air as a ledger. Silas's chair by the kennel sits empty. Good. He is likely listening to Reverend Pike weigh mercy and order at the gallery rail while his boots remember how to drag. The young bitch wakes first, as predicted, when a gust pulls scent into her nostrils. She circles in confusion, tangling the watchers into a braid of restless motion, not loose, not loud, just wrong enough that they will scramble when the big bell in the valley speaks. Eliza sets a small decoy keyring by the feed bin, the shaved bit gleaming dull in moonless light. It is not for the dogs. It is for a man's hand later, the first frantic grab in the wrong place when something else goes to flame. The lane to Nathan Wren's storehouse dips into shadow where the fence sags. She keeps low, a kitchen shape among barrel shapes. Inside, smells of brine and pork rinds and flour. Keys hang from a peg she cannot reach without revealing the intention the whole valley expects from bodies like hers. But Wren is predictable beyond his ring. He keeps a spare key wedged in a stanchion crack by the third stall, a superstition against dropping metal in the straw. Her fingers find it by splinter map. The door to the inner room yields. Barrels stand like soldiers. One salt barrel wears the chalk X of underweight, a mark Wren made himself. She drags it half a foot, distance recorded by scuff, forensics made ahead of their finders. From her apron, she takes the sheet of paper she copied in the office and presses it briefly to the barrel head to catch a dust print. Not perfect, not necessary, only evidence that paper and salt once touched, that the book had a reason to note salt here, on a night when it should not. She lifts a handful of salt and sprinkles a line toward the door, a path a hurried overseer might blame for dog's distraction later. Then, the keys. She lifts the ring from the peg and weighs it in hand, heavier by evening, as she counted. She swaps her decoy ring onto the peg's shadow and pockets the spare. The shaved bit will promise entry at a desperate turn and shave nothing but time. The tobacco barn has its own breath. Slats drink wind and exhale it. On the north wall, the boards shiver when gusts curl off the ridge. She pulls tinder from her dress seam, a slender nest made of kitchen sweepings free of hearth smell. No one checks a woman's hems for kindling when they have already taken her name into a ledger. She builds a straw fire under the eave, small as cupped hands, and feeds it by measure. 1, then 2, then 3, twists of dried tobacco stems stolen days ago and flattened under a book. She does not want a blaze yet. She wants ash patterns first, the script the barn writes when smoke hits sheer. The gray lifts, slides, and lays itself down in long strokes on the north wall's inner face. It will look like a draft problem to a sheriff, like a fluke to a jury. It will say weather to a man who wants to say anything but arson. She sets a charred ledger leaf, torn earlier from an abandoned account book in the loft, into the ash bed, lets a corner blacken, then smothers the flame with a damp cloth. The deed is half done, not to erase but to confuse. The real burn belongs elsewhere. She cracks the loft hatch and pushes out 2 dry sticks that land in the yard with a sound sharp enough to call a frown from any listener. Another future breadcrumb. Something was moving in the loft, someone will say, without quite saying who. In the quarters, an elder woman has been mending by the door for an hour longer than usual, shawl folded as if the night were colder than it is. Her task is simple. Stand when a lantern swings in the big house and knock a spoon against a basin once for clear yard, twice for company. She knocks once when Eliza's shadow crosses the sill, then goes back to her seam. 2 boys have a different job and no knowledge of the whole. One takes a bundle of kitchen bones and tosses them by the fence where the bell rope stands. The other carries a strip of bacon rind the length of his forearm up the lane and ties it low on a fence post near the warm spring road bend. They will sleep through the bell, and they will wake believing they fed dogs. A younger man walks the swamp trail that follows Mossy Run by habit every night. Tonight, he carries nothing but a memory of which stones sit proud above the black mud. If someone needs a waterline at speed, his feet will leave the first prints there. Eliza has not asked names for any of this. Routines, not conspiracies, keep people alive. The old church's vestry door takes a small shove. Reverend Pike's minutes ledger lies on the desk, edges sharp with righteousness. Eliza does not touch it. She touches the drawer beneath, the one that holds institutional convenience. 6 fairy chits pre-signed for church matters, meant to speed holy errands. She slides one free and tucks it into the hem behind the kindling slit, paper warm against skin. The bell rope hangs through the loft opening, thick as a wrist. She brushes it with the back of her hand, enough to lift dust, not enough to call anyone. Not yet. When she steps into the yard, wind shears tremble the smaller farm bell, and the meat scrap at its post streaks scent along wood. Down the slope the kennel stirs into argument. She holds until the second valley peal, the old church bell, heavy as law, rolling out across fields. The young bitch panics and pulls the others into confusion. Somewhere on the gallery, Silas Mott's cup tilts. On the road, Nathan Wren rises from his chair because he has trained himself to stand on bells. The wind changes too soon. A hard shove off the ridge presses smoke back into the barn and tries to coax flame into a dry seam she did not prepare. The ash she wanted as script threatens to become a tongue. She adapts. She drags the smoldering nest a yard farther along the wall, then stomps it flat with the heel of her shoe, leaving a crisp oval print that will later plead woman's foot to any surveyor. She tosses 3 soaked rags into the loft to sag above the slats like gray fruit, a visual that suggests a cook's carelessness rather than intent. The barn survives, for now, but it has learned to smoke. Dogs break toward the lane anyway, noses thieving along the bell rope, then snapping at the fence post that tastes of bacon rind. Their barking makes a corridor of sound for anyone listening from the road. Wren hears, as planned, and misreads it as trespass. Wren's boots hit his storehouse threshold hard. The key peg waits where it always waits. He grabs the decoy ring by weight and shape and runs for the inner room. At the lock, the shaved bit promises entry, then slips. He tries another. Slip. He swears inwardly and reaches for his belt for the spare. He forgot he had tucked there at noon. It is gone. He is inside seconds later with a different key from a different peg, but seconds are the whole game when wind wants fire and dogs want fence. Eliza is already gone from the yard. The small office at Wren's house stores his account ledger separate from the storehouse book. The window casement has a hairline split that invites a thin blade. She learned it delivering eggs last month. Tonight, the blade is a butter knife palmed from Hartwell's kitchen at dusk, carried under her sleeve like a saint's relic. The latch lifts. The window opens a hand's width. Inside lies the ledger that gives the church minutes their teeth. She reaches, takes the book, and works by feel more than sight. She does not take it whole. She tears out the assurance page and the 2 that neighbor it, folds them twice, and strikes 1 match from a tin hidden in her shoe. The flame gutters in the draft, then eats a corner. She lets it eat. She feeds it with scrap from a basket beside the desk, receipts, never their originals, and pinches the blaze into a violent whisper that leaves charred edges and a stink no one will forget. She crumbles half the sheet into the hearth to pass as a failed warming. The other half goes into her waistband, black grit against skin, proof enough when proof must be more than rumor. She sets the ledger back with a wet thumbprint she borrowed from the kitchen pail. Moisture will blur ink at one edge by morning, disguising what is gone as an accident of care. Paper now argues with paper. Hartwell's book says fairy. Wren's book is wounded where assurance lived, and the church minutes name a pious Sunday that will not survive the chit. The lane to the North River ford runs under locust and elm. The night has cooled into a thin sleet that pricks skin and slicks stones. Eliza's feet find the high places the young man's memory promised. At the keeper's hut, a lantern burns low, a smear behind glass. She does not knock. She leaves the ferry chit on the rail in reach of a waking hand and steps into the boat moored for early crossings, rope loose enough to slide when a thoughtful person has left it so. The current pushes, stubborn but not deep tonight. She pulls hand over hand, not strong so much as steady. Behind her, the old church bell rings a 3rd time, for reasons the minutes will later rephrase as necessity. In the valley, dogs split their attention between the bell post and the fence line, running the wrong corridor. At Wren's, a thin smoke thread sneaks from a window where a ledger sits too warm. At Hartwell's, the office cabinet latch sticks for Absalom when he checks his numbers and finds them obedient. On the far bank, a neighbor child in a red shawl stands on a fence rail and taps the wood with a stick, counting a wagon she cannot see in the dark and hearing a boat she will not name. The rhythm changes after 3 taps. She pauses, then begins again, a small, bright metronome that will later tell a mother, and a mother will tell a friend, and a rumor will find a road. Eliza does not go to a single safe house. She goes to a route. First, the swamp trail along Mossy Run, then the old trace that skirts the mill pond, then the wagon ruts that lead not to Staunton, but away, into the folds where men from the ironworks sleep off Saturday with their boots on. Every turn burns a bit more of the map behind her. A dog pack pulling the wrong way on Bacon Air, a storehouse key peg with the wrong weight, a barn wall painted with ash script that says wind, when a question asks who, a ledger with a page missing and a hearth that smells like near fire rather than heat. By the time the moonless middle gives way to the cold hour before dawn, smoke has found a bolder seam in Wren's office. A flame runs it like a fuse and licks the ledger's foredge until the book swells and splits with a wet pop. A servant slaps it out with a rag, leaving a black mouth across the binding that will never close cleanly again. Weather, someone will say toward morning, but the charred ledger leaf in Eliza's waistband insists otherwise with each step. She does not look back. The waterline behind her reflects no flame yet, but the record is already on fire. She has forced the books to disagree in public, and disagreement makes sheriffs nervous. She has forced the dogs to chase a bell. She has forced a minister to find his own signature on a pass he did not hand to the person who used it. At the bend where the warm spring road meets the trace, she pauses under a sycamore to breathe and tie down the grit-flecked paper under her stays. Sleet ticks on leaves. Somewhere upriver, a small bell on a ferry post knocks in the wind like a heart trying to be brave. The choice has already been made. Whether the barn catches fully or the office merely stinks of scorch, whether Reverend Pike writes a careful euphemism or thunders about theft, whether Wren counts keys or curses weather, the plan no longer belongs to thought. It belongs to evidence. The old church bell takes a breath and tolls once more, hard, insistent, a sound that pulls the whole valley to wake and tally what it thinks it owns. Eliza steps off the road into the trees and does not stop. The bell's note hangs in sleet like a blade. The point of no return has already passed. The hour has finally arrived. Dawn comes thin and metallic. Sleet has crusted the tobacco leaves to a dull sheen and left the yard at Hartwell Place pocked with shallow mirrors. The first finder is not a man of law, but a habit, the woman who sweeps the office each morning. She notices the tinder splinters on the rug and the cabinet latch that sticks one hair more than usual. When Absalom Hartwell takes the ribboned household ledger to Total Soap and Salt, he flinches at a damp blur along one margin and a line item he does not remember authorizing. Church messengers toll. He touches the page and comes away with the faint scent of old smoke, as if the paper had slept near a hearth. Across the lane, Silas Mott lurches from a bad night's catechism with the dogs already wrong. The young bitch running the fence in panicked loops, the two hunters nosing the bell rope post, muzzles streaked with grease. He follows the arc of their attention to the tobacco barn and sees soot frilling the north wall like faded handwriting. Inside, the air tastes scorched. Near the eave, ash patterns have settled into long strokes that rise, flatten, and drift, the signature of wind sheer off the ridge. Half hidden where the slats meet, a charred ledger leaf curls like a dead moth. Silas snatches it and crushes it without reading, then remembers too late that ashes say more when left alone. At Wren's storehouse, Nathan Wren discovers a peg lighter than his hand expects and a decoy keyring whose shaved bit promises entry and gives none. He finds scuffs near the salt barrel marked with chalk, then a faint dust print on a loose sheet that should not have been near salt at all. His temper travels faster than his logic, and by the time he reaches the office in his house, the room smells of a fire recently convinced not to live. The account ledger has burst its spine, a black mouth yawning where the household assurances pages used to sit. A crust of soot coats the hearth, and the window latch shows the fine, clean scar of a blade too thin for carpentry. The house servant swears she banked the fire. Wren chooses to hear disloyalty instead. By mid-morning, the keeper at the North River notices a ferry chit drying on the rail, pre-signed for Church Matters in Reverend Pike's hand, its ink haloed by sleet. The stamp reads, Staunton, the county seat. He pockets it to present later, because pieces of paper with stamps are safer in pockets than on rails. On the fence above the ford, a smear of grit catches red thread fibers like those from a child's shawl. The valley's map binds itself by noon. Quarters, yard, storehouse, tobacco barn, old church on Mossy Run, the Augusta Courthouse in Staunton, and the North River Ford. A route has been walked. The objects agree on it, even when men do not. On November 5, 1854, the Augusta sheriff rides to Hartwell Place with 2 deputies and a paper already half-written. They begin at the office cabinet. The sheriff's pencil taps the ledger entry for church messenger's toll, then moves to the ash-breathed barn, then to the kennel, where he notes 4 dogs, scent confusion near the bell. He writes it down because numbers anchor men who do not wish to anchor their minds elsewhere. He pins the decoy keyring in a scrap of cloth and tucks it into a pocket like a talisman. By November 7th, the sheriff sits with Reverend Pike in the vestry of the old church. The room is neat, its smell a mix of ink and wool. The minister's minutes ledger shows a Sunday admonition and a notation for catechism during the very hours when silences multiplied elsewhere. The sheriff places the fairy chit on the desk. Pike reads his own signature and swallows institutional air. The euphemism they settle on is prompt and sturdy: theft of church chits and misuse of the rope. The bell rope, a tool without motive, becomes the closest thing the church will admit to culpability. The minister writes a new line in the minutes. Henceforth, chits to be kept under lock, rope access restricted. Policy dressed as piety moves faster than mercy. On November the 9th, at the Augusta Courthouse in Staunton, the clerk opens the deed book for the year prior and reads the line that put Eliza Hartwell between salt and a mare. In the courtroom, green baize table, 3 chairs, 12 men called as a jury for form more than for verdict. The sheriff lays out the objects in the order he prefers them to speak: the charred ledger leaf from the barn. A deputy retrieved a second scrap from the ash trough. The household ledger opened to church messenger's toll. The decoy key ring with its shaved bit. A rusted lock from the Hartwell cabinet carried along as if to explain why entry left no wound. A barrel head rubbing dusted with faint salt. The fairy chit that carries Pike's neat hand and estate stamp. He mentions dogs as a line item. 4 at the Hartwell kennel, distracted by grease at bellpost. He names the places: Hartwell Place Yard, Storehouse, Tobacco Barn, Old Church, North River Ford. He avoids the word arson. He says weather, and the jury nods because they know the ridge throws wind like a teamster throws his voice. Nathan Wren presses for an arrest, his voice careful, his eyes on the missing pages in his ledger. The sheriff does not promise what he cannot guarantee. Flight becomes the official noun. Misuse of trust becomes the phrase that lets men discuss a girl's body without naming it. Absalom Hartwell insists his ledger is accurate and his sorrow appropriate. He does not say her name aloud. Search parties ride the warm spring road and the trace toward the ironworks. They find shoe prints at the swamp trail along Mossy Run, ovals shallow where the mud stiffened from a night's cold, and lose them in slush among cart ruts and deer sign. They ask at mills and ferries for a girl of middling height who reads. Some men think to ask for a servant with soot on her hands. The keeper at the North River tells them about a chit left without a knock. He does not mention the grit caught on a splinter near shawl fibers because he has forgotten it in the cold. On November 12th, a notice appears in the Staunton paper offering a reward for a runaway indenture, a phrase that satisfies both debt and respectability. The notice lists no scars, only reading as a suspicious competence. It does not list a ribbon with knots. Eliza does not return to the map men have drawn for her. She sleeps the first night in a charcoal patch above the ironworks, where black keeps black safer than any hedge. On the second day, she follows a peddler at a distance until his road forks away from Staunton and toward the mountain coves. By the end of the first week, she moves with the rhythm of wagons that do not stop at churches and eats from kettles that never get written in anyone's minutes. A woman with a scar at her wrist tightens Eliza's stays and hides the half-crumbled ledger leaf in a quilt roll until the black grit makes its own weather and blows away in a cabin draft. There's no heroism here either, only a redistribution of caution. Back in the valley, Hartwell Place resumes the business of appearing unchanged. The tobacco barn wears its soot like an old cough. The storehouse hangs its keys higher. The old church secures its chits in a tin box that clacks shut with a new lock that will rust in a year. Silas Mott adds an extra peg to the kennel wall and praises himself for vigilance while the young bitch still runs at every bell. There is no execution. There is no trial. There is only flight recorded as rumor and tidy euphemisms recorded as order. On December 1st, Reverend Pike writes in the minutes, "Resolved that assurances of household virtue shall henceforth exclude persons under guardianship to creditors." The sentence kinks under its own weight. It is called prudence. It reads as indictment if you tilt it. Legacy, rumor paths, policy backlash, altered routines. Rumor takes the warm spring road in both directions. One version says a servant girl set a barn to burn and fled under sleet with dogs on her heels until the river took pity and rolled her under. Another says a planter's daughter learned to speak ledger and snapped its spine, walking out between arguments as if between two hedges. A third story, whispered near the North River ford, tells of a boat that moved without oars while the bell rang for catechism the third time, and of a red-shawled child counting a wagon that never came and hearing water talk instead. Policy grows out of rumor the way thorns grow out of green branches. The church minutes thicken with caution. Chits to be numbered and witnessed, bell rope access by vestry key, private admonitions to be avoided when secular matters are entangled. The courthouse clerk adds a new line to the deed book index under assurances, domestic, a filing that looks neutral and tastes metallic. In households up and down Mossy Run, ledgers move from open tabletops to drawers, from drawers to boxes, from boxes to rooms with doors that shut and latch. The kitchen feels the change first, pantries locked after dusk, tally books counted like silver, scraps disposed before dogs learn more than men want them to know. A cook is now asked to show her hands before she leaves the scullery. A girl who reads is watched. In the quarters, the elder who knocked the spoon against the basin stops mending by the threshold at dusk and takes her seam to a darker corner. 2 boys are told not to feed dogs unless told by a man with a key. The younger man who knows the swamp trail still walks it at night, but he looks over his shoulder for lanterns and sees only frog's eyes and starlight. None of them say, "We did this," because life is long when names are withheld. Years later, 2019 already has its paper trail. A docent at the old church on Mossy Run lifts the lid of a tin box marked Chits Mid-Century and shows visitors the careful reforms of men who feared their own carelessness. The rope that once hung open now loops behind a gate, soft and forbidding as a sermon's last line. In the Library of Virginia reading room, the flat archival box still holds the deed of trust that named a daughter between salt and a mare. Next to it lies a half-scorched scrap cataloged as unknown ledger leaf barn context, its edges feathered into gray. A researcher notes the phrase "church messenger's toll" in the Hartwell household book and flags it as an anomaly. Another footnote says the rent account ledger suffered fire damage of uncertain origin during the very week the church recorded an admonition no one now defines. The valley keeps its schedules. The old church bell still rings for weddings and weather and harvest, 3 notes that carry across fields the way law once did. On certain winter evenings when wind scrapes the ridge and sleet glazes the yard, the bell's sound thins and skates, and the youngest dog in a new generation startles and runs the fence without knowing why. In a loft at the back of a small museum, someone has hung a sampler with a ribbon sewn along its edge, knots spaced at careful intervals. No label explains them. The ribbon is a private ledger that outlived the public ones. The echo lands where policy meets memory. The church's added rules sit in their neat column, locks, witnesses, numbered slips, and yet the rumor travels anyway, because rumors run where roads do, and where rivers do, and where ledgers cannot. The story ends not with flame, but with contradiction preserved. Paper against paper, bell against dogs, minutes against memory. The last image is simple. A ledger closed, a rope quiet, and somewhere beyond the North River ford, a path braided into brush where footsteps passed once and left only the shape of caution behind.